All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Utkarsh. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Elaniti. And we are trying to make a data-driven transition happen to regenerative agriculture. What if 95% of your food disappeared? Now, that's a very provocative question, but it might actually be a reality that we're facing because 95% of the food that we currently produce comes directly or indirectly from the soil. And soil is being degenerated at an alarming rate at the moment. Now, soil can also serve as a very important tool in our battle against climate change because we can sequester tremendous amounts of carbon in the soil. It's estimated that you can sequester 10 billion tons of soil of carbon in UK soils alone. And that's where we're based. And we know that regenerative agricultural practices are the answer. In fact, 15 to 25% nutrient efficiency gains can be seen from regenerative agricultural practices being adopted. And it can also lead to on-farm profitability increases of 80%. So what drives the mechanisms behind these gains? Well, it's really the soil biology, which is the aggregation of the fungi, bacteria, protozoa, and nematodes that exists under the soil. And so soil biology is the driver behind soil chemistry. So do we have a good way to measure soil biology today and monitor it? Well, believe it or not, the best way for us to do it at the moment is a pair of cotton underpants. Farmers are being told by leading agricultural organizations like the NFU and LEAF to literally plant their pants. So what does this have to do with soil health or soil quality or soil biology? Well, 1 teaspoon of healthy agricultural soil contains up to 10 billion microorganisms. And these bacteria and fungi are what actually decompose the cotton in these cotton underpants. So the faster these cotton underpants break down, the better your soil biology is, and therefore the better your soil health is. And that's why these underpants tests, as they're called, serve as a proxy determinant of your soil health. But we think there's a better way. We think there's a smarter, more outcome-focused way to manage this transition. At Elaniti, we measure the soil for biological, physical, chemical factors, and then we correlate and combine that data with historical crop outcomes and historical farming practice data from our partners. And so what we are trying to do is understand how the farming practices that we deploy in our soil affects the soil biology, therefore affects the soil chemistry, and how that soil biology and therefore soil chemistry affects the downstream crop outcomes like nutrient density, yield quality, and disease and pest resilience. And we deliver all of this through a digital measurement, reporting, and verification platform. And what we do here is we support and measure and monitor adherence to different what are called growers protocols that the FMCG or CPG industry is putting out to track soil health improvements for their supplier farmers. And we're kicking this off with a pilot that's currently ongoing. In fact, my co-founder Scott and Nimisha are out in the UK at the moment testing the soil for our pilot participant farmers. Our pilot covers 2,000 hectares. It's focused on winter wheat, so it's focused on farms that are primarily growing winter wheat. And we are partnering with CamGrain, which is a very large grain cooperative based out in the UK. And our research partners are Rothamsted Research, who are a long-standing agricultural institute in the UK. Now, this partnership is very important because CamGrain allows us access to their customers, large FMCGs or CPGs like Nestle and so forth, to actually run our pricing discovery and run our value discovery. But we also, through them, get access directly to the farmers because they represent over 500 farmers. As far as the competitor landscape, is more of a competitor ecosystem. This is a very uncharted area of science, of data science, and so different entities are taking different approaches. We actually think that we are able to work and collaborate with a lot of the competitors that are on this slide. But as far as the space goes, there are entities like Senon or Yardstick, and they're primarily focused on carbon quantification in a proximal way. So you stick a probe into the soil and you run carbon quantification. We want to mix that with biological quantification. Then you have your remote sensing companies like Bomitra and Regro, and they're primarily focused on top-down optical measurements, but we also mix that with proximal data. Then there are DNA-focused startups like Trace Genomics and Biomakers, who are lab-based and who provide a lot of very in-depth data on the soil biology. And then, of course, there are agronomy or farmer-focused entities like CLEAM or Climate Farmers. And we want to bring all of this
time
together.
Is up. Sorry, I gave you some extra time because I forgot to give you the 1 minute warning.
Oh, sorry.
No, all good. Let me bring in the other panelists. Well, I do. One of the big questions I had with this is just how you scale the business and how you build it into something sustainable. That was something when we talked last time, and I'm curious where you're at in terms of thoughts on that and outlook for the future.
Right. So we're currently focused on this middle layer of the agricultural supply chain. And so those are the grain brokers or the grain cooperatives, farming cooperatives that represent a lot of farmers. It's quite difficult to build a viable business going directly to the farmers because they're very scattered and it's hard to actually reach a large number of farmers. So at the moment, what's happening is a lot of the FMCGs or CPGs, they're introducing financial incentives to get their supplier farmers onto regenerative practices. And so they want to disseminate these incentives to farmers based on improvements, but there's not really a good way for them to directly track and monitor that performance or to determine who deserves what level of financial incentive. And so they're tasking these middle layer brokers or their tier one suppliers with that objective, with determining which of their supplier farmers actually deserve those incentives. And so our collaboration with CamGrain is quite key because that's exactly what we're helping CamGrain do. We're helping them determine how to disseminate some of these incentives or how to measure farmer performance across their portfolio of farmers. And so our eventual goal is to measure or monitor adherence against a specific FMCG or CPG, as it's known in the US, protocol, and then scale our platform to support several protocols. So you can almost think about it as a Credit Karma view where there's a credit score run by TransUnion and Equifax. And in this case, there might be a protocol from Nestle and one from McCain Foods and one from Weetabix. And we would be able to show each farmer their adherence level to each of those protocols because we are pulling from the same common repository of data. And we can also tell them where they might be able to unlock some of these financial incentives. So our goal really is to start off with this middle layer and then go top down and start going directly to the FMCGs and start rolling out across their tier one suppliers.
I'm curious, just probably get to it in slides, what is your business model? And also, what's the balance between software and kind of consulting or field services that you have?
Yeah, so our business model right now, if I can share my screen real quick. We're a pre-seed startup, so we're running our pricing discovery at the moment, with CamGrain, and we're approaching some of their customers, trying to come up with this price point together. But we think that we are quite cost competitive at about 80 pounds per hectare price point, and this is about a 2% increase or 2% premium on the cost of the underlying wheat itself. So in our case, we're focused on wheat farming. So that's about a 2% increase per hectare or 2% premium paid by the FMCGs for this service. Now, a very important principle for us is we are not charging the farmers for any of these services. It's very important for us to keep that as a principle. But again, we are still determining that price point. It depends on some of the discovery that we conduct with these customers. But we have seen indications from the market. For example, in the UK, Arla is paying about a 2% premium for dairy that's produced using regenerative practices. So we think that it might be a viable price point. And sorry, Ted, what was the second part of your question? The software and...
what's the balance of software versus services? And I believe you mean hectares per year, or is this a one-time cost?
This is per year. The testing is ongoing. So, you need to track the improvement of the soil biology and the soil chemistry year over year. Potentially, you could do once every 2 years because these changes are not that rapid. And the second part of your question was software versus consulting, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so the way that we're rolling out our pilot at the moment is the farmers are quite accustomed to receiving data on soil physical characteristics and soil chemical characteristics, but they haven't really been receiving any information or interpretation of soil biology. And so our collaboration with Rothamsted Research here is pretty key because in addition to my third founder, Namisha, who's a soil scientist with 15 years of experience in soil science. We also have support from Rothamsted Research and their cohort of scientists who have specialized in the wheat microbiome to interpret a lot of this information. And so the way we're going to run the pilot is a bit more on the consulting end because we'll provide human-oriented or human-in-the-loop interpretations of this data. But that's where my expertise comes in. So I'm an applied data science and ML person. And what we're going to do is start linking and organizing some of those insights that the scientists come up with against some of the factors or heuristics that they use to come up with those insights. And so eventually we can start automating some of that advice. So there's a larger coverage or more efficient coverage of acreage for every single soil expert that we need to keep in the loop.
Just had a quick question on how you guys conduct your operations. So are you guys actually going onto the farm site yourself to get the soil samples, or are the farmers mailing you guys so you could do it, without being on site?
Yeah, so for the pilot effort, since it's a fairly limited area, we are doing it ourselves. But we'll that's something that we've considered as a possibility. We would need to give advice to the farmers in terms of the mapping of the samples because every single sample that we collect is geotagged and time tagged. So the experiment or the sampling strategy or like exactly where you take samples in subsequent years, it doesn't have to be at the same spots. In fact, there's a larger advantage if you take it in different spots to get like this aggregated view, right? Because you can start interpolating some of the data based on that and get wider coverage. So we would be open to kind of having the farmers send us some of the sampling, or we're also considering having some samplers go out there and test. It really depends on that price point, how the economics line up. But yeah, for the pilot effort, we're doing it ourselves. And it takes about a day of testing for covering maybe, 20, about 100 acres or so, or 100 hectares.
And going back to Ted's question on the business/revenue model, with regards to the 80 pounds per hectare per year, is that just the software, or is that the consulting, or is that the blended fee?
That's the blended fee. Yeah, that's for the entire service.
Okay.
But what we're providing is really on the farming side, we're providing them with. So one thing I wasn't able to mention is we'll sort of run this as like a healthcare product where, just like in healthcare, you have PHI. So you can give aggregated insight at a population level, to someone that's interested in looking at the overall health. But for a singular patient, you would only give them their private information. We're running a very similar data architecture. So on the farming side, we'll be able to give farmers very, very detailed and customized insight in terms of how to improve their soil. But at the FMCG and grain broker level, we'll be giving them aggregated baseline information so they can look at the population as a whole. So we're providing this sort of traceable assurance on these incentives actually making an impact to the FMCGs. And then for the farmers, we're actually more directly telling them how to improve their soil, right? Which is sort of going back to the first principles of what matters to the farmers. But yeah, for this entire service, we are going to be charging the 80 pounds.
Why not insurance brokers so they could get a cheaper premium because they have healthier soil?
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, it's mostly just from a simplicity perspective, that's something that we've definitely considered, and it's a potentially revenue generator for us as well. That's something that a lot of farmers have brought up to us, a lot of our partners have brought up to us as well. It's just not something that we're very actively considering at the moment, but it's something that we will definitely consider in the future. And there is that element, because the soil biology almost serves as a futures market for your soil carbon market, right? Because the biology changes much more quickly than the chemistry. The biology is kind of coming in and out, and then you can have like a futures outcome, like 5 years down the line, and predict how much the soil carbon is going to change or not change. So even from like a carbon perspective, there is potentially levers that we have there for this data.
How deep do you have to get to measure the samples?
So we use these soil cores, it's anywhere between 10 centimeters to 20 centimeters deep. It depends on the soil compaction.
Could a drone do it?
I think there's some work that's happening in this space, but we haven't really explored that, mainly because we actually want to go and have like a chat with the farmer in the morning of the testing to understand like where there might be aberrant or interesting, behaviors within the field. And so we're actually running the experiment design the morning of as well. And so for our pilot effort, at least, it's better for us to collect it in person. But yeah, in the future, that's something that we might consider if it's able to go deeper.
Are you worried about any pushback from the fertilizer companies? Because I'm pretty sure their product are killing the soil health. So the more you guys test, the worse they look, than vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty nuanced, situation, because it's not like you can switch wholesale to regenerative practices and quit the application of all chemicals cold turkey. The way the situation is right now, the soil biology is just not going to be able to support it. We saw this in Sri Lanka, a few months ago, where they banned a lot of the agricultural chemical inputs, and they ended up having a catastrophic failure of their crops because the soil biology, at least in its current state, is unable to fix some of these chemicals for you. Now, that doesn't mean that it cannot be, brought up to actually support that. It can, but there's a place for all of that, right? Like what we think is we need more precision applications of chemicals because there are advantages to some of this. If you switch to regenerative practices, most farmers tell us that they need to use an increased amount of herbicide because they start getting a lot of weeds that are out competing the crops. And so even if they stop using fertilizer, they have to use herbicide. And so what we are trying to find is that optimal point where there's yield stability with the application of these chemical inputs at the right level so that the soil biology can still recover harvest cycle over harvest cycle. Of course, it's not going to recover as fast as if you just let the land rewild, but that's not really the objective function for agricultural land, right? For agricultural land, the objective is to get crops out of it. And so that's why our objective function is crop stability. And at the moment, that includes chemical application as well as healing your soil biology. So that's the the kind of golden medium that we're trying to find.
Awesome. Any last questions? It looks like Melissa.
Yeah, thanks. I'm curious if there are any limitations for where you can work geographically, or understanding that this first customer pilot is in the UK, and what your plans are going forward.
Yeah, so so for our technology, it's quite crop specific, right? So when you start building these algorithms out, it's going to be specific to a single crop type. So not that we're targeting wheat right now because we're based in the UK, and wheat is the most the largest crop by area, as well as volume in the UK. And so the natural next step for us would be to target countries that have large amounts of wheat production. So we're actually attending a program in Australia that's a collaboration between the UK government and the Australian government, and we're going to be trying to build some relationships there as well. Australia produces a lot of wheat. We've had some promising discussions with universities in the US as well, although we're quite focused in the UK at the moment. Another advantage that I wanted to mention is this is not something that we really look deep into from a pricing perspective. But one of the advantages of this sort of ML-driven approach is The weakness of a lot of small holding farmers, right, is that their land holdings are very scattered and fragmented. And so a lot of agricultural businesses or innovation, they want to target the 1,000-hectare farms, right, rather than the half a hectare farm somewhere in India. And in this case, the diversity of those data points actually works in our favor, because no farmer is going to run their or manage their land in the exact same way. And because we're trying to get as many data points as possible to understand the links between farming practices and how the soil biology is modified, we think that we can actually provide this service to a lot of these countries that have small landholders, subsidized by these large industrial farms in developed countries, because it's going to help us run our algorithms that produce better results for those same developed countries. And so we think that this might actually be a really virtuous cycle that doesn't ignore a lot of those farms, that doesn't just focus on industrial farming, but can actually go and have a much larger impact.